So in addition to questions that I've received about the dipping technique that I use for my rats, I've also received some questions about the basing technique that I use for all of my armies, actually. And it's this. This is the end product anyway. It looks much more complicated than it is. The basic concept is just to put a lot of different stuff on it to add depth and texture. And so what I thought I would do, since I need to finish these wrap models that I'm doing for my other video, is sort of make this video in conjunction with that one to also demonstrate this basing technique. As I just said, I use it for all of my armies because what that allows me to do, especially with like the human ones, is I can sort of mix and match. If I'm playing an Empire army or a mercenary army or a dwarf army, doesn't really matter. I can kind of pull models from my entire collection because everything has the exact same base. So what I'm going to do first, I think, before I dive right in, is I'll cut here and I'll show you just a quick assortment of all of the products that I have, just to give you an idea of where we're headed. So what we have here is most of my basing supplies, and this looks like a lot because it is, but a lot of this is actually similar product. So very briefly, let me go through what this is and what of it is necessary, because it's not all necessary. A lot of it's sort of just to add diversity within sort of the same genre of basing supply. So at the front here, we've got Army Painter tufts, which are really great, especially in conjunction with regular static grass, because static grass is, you know, yay high, and then the tufts are bigger, and they add just, you know, a little bit of height that might otherwise be lacking. We've got, sort of in that same vein, we've got these flowers, which is, it's the same product. It just has these sort of colored bits on the top, and these are cool. This is a recent addition for me. I like the pop of color that they offer. And we have your regular static grass. And then back here, we've got what are like railway supplies. I picked them up at hobby stores. I mean, this bag I've been working on since I was like 14. So I've had it for a long time. And you can oftentimes pick this stuff up for real cheap at you know, a local hobby store. And it just adds, as I said, a nice variety. And then we've got the easy stuff. So this is just some sand. This is like river sand that I've been using. I don't think I've ever bought sand. I'll get sand, as I said, like we have a stream by my in-laws' house, and I'll just get some of that sand, dry it out, maybe from a different source, and the mix as a result, you can see it's like fine grit, but it's a nice variety of grit as well. There's some like larger rocks and stuff in there, so that's super helpful. And then just a bag of like sticks and rocks and stuff that I found outside. So that's easy and free. So I think it'll be easier to explain how these get used as we go along. The couple of key points is that all of these certainly don't get used on any one model. Even a large model would not get all of these used. But over the course of, like, say, a unit of 50 models, probably I would use just about all of this stuff in you know, varying degrees of quantity. And yeah, again, don't be overwhelmed by this. If you're starting out and you're trying to figure out what to get, I would recommend one tuft from the Army Painter, one of these. You do need some kind of sand. You do need some kind of static grass. So these two things, again, I think that, yeah, this is also Army Painter. So they make a good product, they really do. So Army Painter, static grass, some tufts, and then go outside, get some sand, and then get some sticks and rocks and stuff, and that's going to be a really solid foundation. And then from there, if you want to branch out to some of this other stuff, it just adds more variety and makes it look more like it's really outside. So let's go back to some models here, and then we'll start working through the process together. So for those who watch the dipping video, you'll notice that these models have had sand and rocks and stuff on them the entire time I've been working on them. And that's because I typically go in at the very beginning and do that basing. And I don't know why, it's just then you can prime over it and it helps it all sort of adhere. And then at the end, you don't have to worry about gluing or putting in place sand over an already painted model. So that's just my process. I don't I don't think it actually matters if you want to come in at the end and do your sanding and rocks and sticks and whatnot. That's totally up to you. But two things I wanted to say on what has happened here so far. What I do first is any model base large enough to accommodate some like rocks and stuff, I'll go through and do that first before I put any sand down. And that's just what I've done with these two big rats here in the back. These other guys, there might be one or two that just have like a smallish rock on it in addition to the sand. But I'll put that down with super glue. I'll just go in with super glue, dotted super glue, put some big rocks down, just again to add depth. That's sort of what we're trying to do here, is to make it look like real outside, and I don't want it to look like plains or anything like that. So yeah, so just where it makes sense to you to put some rocks and stuff down just to create visual interest. And then what I do to put sand down, I have found, and I don't know why, but much better than like your Elmer's glue, PVC, white glue. That's traditionally what's recommended to put sand down, is you mix some of this with some water and then dip it in the sand mixture and away you go. What I've found is much more effective, and as I said, I don't know why, is just paint. If you take this stuff, this is like Apple Barrel 50-cent paint from Walmart, and this is incidentally the same paint that I use for actually painting the bases, which we'll get to in a minute. But if you use this and just straight out of the bottle, don't really dilute it much, maybe just a little bit, but if you just use this straight out of the barrel and put it on the base and then dip the base immediately into the sand don't come off. I don't know why it's so much more adhesive than glue, but I swear by it, and I'll never do anything different. And also it's nice because it pre-pigments everything on the base level. So once we've done that, let's just assume you're following what I've done. We've glued down our rocks, we've glued down any sticks that you want to put down or anything like that. We've gone through, painted our bases and sanded them, and we painted them now. So now you're sitting where I'm sitting, staring at these models. What we're then going to do is we're going to come in with a dark base color, and what we're going to do is paint the whole base in that base color. In this case, you may have seen earlier that I kind of have what I'm going for, like a Mediterranean vibe to the base. It's sort of a lighter tan color. It's not supposed to be like deep forest. So the darkest color that I use is this Territorial Beige from Apple Barrel. As I said, you can get this at Walmart for 50 cents, but really any cheap paint is what you want to be using. I don't recommend you use your Citadel paints because they are very expensive, and the reason they're expensive is because the pigment count is high, and that's really not going to help you here. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to base coat everything in this color, and we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so that layer is now down, and we're going to now switch gears. We're going to, well, let that dry as best as you can, but if you're working in a big batch here, then by the time you get back to the start, you know, it should be dry toward the beginning of the batch. What we're going to do now is move on to anything that has like a rock or, you know, stick or whatever else you decided to put on your base. We're going to switch over to just paint those in whatever color it is that you wanted to paint them. So I think for my rocks, I'm going to go with this, I don't know, generic gray color. And then for the branches and stuff, I'm going to go with this darker brown, which is noticeably darker than the base color that I went with. So I don't know if I mentioned it earlier. You could, this works for any base color you want to use. You obviously don't have to go with the same colors that I'm using. The concept is exactly the same. If you want to use like a darker base color for your base color, I wish I had a more technical term for this, but if you know the starting layer, if you wanted to start with a darker color, when we get to the next step, which is a dry brushing step, you would then just go kind of one shade lighter than this versus what I'm doing, which is starting with like almost like a Bane Blade brown color, and then going up to like a bleached bone color from there for the next dry brush step. You would just, as I said, go one step down from there. So I'm going to quickly do that. You don't have to watch me do that. I'm going to paint the rocks in gray, the sticks in this dark brown, and we'll be right back. Okay, And so that part's done. That was easy. As I said, rocks are gray, sticks are kind of a dark brown color. And what you could do now, and I'm not gonna do because I'm feeling a little bit lazy, is do just a kind of lighter dry brush, whatever color you use, and maybe take that color, mix a little bit of white or like a bleached bone color, and brighten it up, and then just do a quick dry brush. It's not strictly necessary, and I'm going to try to demonstrate that it's not strictly necessary by just moving to the next step, which is going one shade lighter from whatever your brown base color was. And we're going to then apply this as a dry brush. Now, if you do have rocks or sticks or twigs or anything down, I don't know how to explain this. You're dry brushing over everything is what I guess I'm trying to say. And the reason is because if you walk around outside, rocks aren't just placed on top of the ground, right? They're kind of part of the ground. All the colors kind of blend. And so it doesn't matter so much keeping everything separated. We're trying to do kind of just the opposite here, which is create a muddled base layer that we're then going to put static grass and tuft foliage down on top of. So okay, so the dry brush layer is done, and once everything is dry, and that's really important for this next step, because we're going to start dipping things into vats of static grass. So if you've got wet paint, static grass is going to stick to everything. We're going to take the static grass because this is going to provide a really nice layer, just like we've been building layers. This is kind of the theme here, is we're building layers and trying to create depth and diversity across these bases. So the first step is to put some static grass down, not over the whole model. I think probably every model should have a little bit of static grass, and as I may have mentioned earlier, maybe not, I apply everything with super glue because it dries super quickly, and you really don't need a lot of this. So what we're doing, there's no science to this, you're just kind of making it up as you go, doing a couple little dabs of super glue, and then dipping it directly into the static grass. And then knocking off all the excess. So I like super glue, just like I said, because it dries really quickly, and because static grass in particular seems to want to stick to it in a way that I can't seem to achieve with just like Elmer's glue. So we'll do that. So again, just kind of patchy little area here. We're not trying to cover up everything we just did. Just picking out some areas where you think a little bit of static grass should be. So I'll do that with all these models, and we'll be back in a second. Okay, static grass is down, and I did not heed my own advice because I was impetuous, and rather than waiting for everything to dry completely, I dropped both of these guys into some static grass, and you can see these guys have sort of patchy bases, and those in the back look like they're running through a lush green field because the static grass stuck to just about everything on the base. So I'll work with that, try to figure that part out. But the next step is we're going to take whatever tufts you have, and I'd say, let's say 2 out of 3 models will get some kind of tuft. Some of them will get 2. You can cut some of these in half. As I said, this is not a science. You're kind of making this up as you go. What's important is that you don't have uniformity. You shouldn't have every base looking the same. You want differences in depth. You want variety. So that's why I've got 3 to choose from. And like I said, not everybody's going to get 1. Some are going to get 2. Some are going to get a big one. Some are going to get a small one. Some will have none. So we'll come back once I've sort of figured all that out and go on to the next step. All right, so we've got some tufts in place, and like I said, I use 3 different varieties of them. You'd be fine with just 1. I just like the variety of color. There's some big ones, some small ones, and not everybody's got one. And the the big guys back there look like they're on a different planet. But the last step here, you'd be fine here, going to the second to last step. But I've, as I mentioned, got some other stuff that I'm going to add on. So I'll add on little flowers every once in a while, and I like this clump foliage, which is really designed for like trees, you know, for railroads and stuff like that. And but I like it. It's got kind of a mossy look, and I put it on the bases that kind of creates like a bush or something on the ground, just for, again, some added texture. And the color's kind of a olivey drab color, which is nice since a lot of the grasses and tufts that we've got here are very vibrant looking. So I'm gonna add those on, and then we'll be back in a second. All right, and so that's it. So I added the final layer of stuff, and I don't know, it probably looks pretty similar to the last shot to you guys, but I don't know if you can see, but there's some flowers back here, just some pops of color. I use those really sparingly, just because, as you can imagine, if you litter the whole base with flowers, that's all anyone's gonna see. And then a couple of those like moss-looking pieces of clump foliage I scatter around just for the texture more than anything. So really, you could be done now. I think those look fine. I think they look pretty cool. And they certainly have, as I said, the diversity, the texture, the different height and depth, which I find really visually appealing. This last step I do for two reasons, and what I'm gonna do is take a very light dry brush of just white and go over almost all the base. It sounds more intense than it is, but what it's gonna do, sorry about that, what it's gonna do is two things. Is it's going to mute the colors down a little bit, because right now it looks like a lovely spring field and not like a war zone. And the second thing that it's going to do is sort of tie it all together, because there's some colors in there that, I won't say they clash, they just, like the bright green static grass, for example, I find to be just a little bit intense. So again, this is an optional step. You don't necessarily have to do it. I'll just show you on, I guess, one model and then do the rest. And like I said, if you're doing this right, it should be subtle anyway. You're really not really gonna notice it, except at like the unit level. You see there how it kind of mutes the color down a little bit, and it kind of blends everything together. I'll do one more just to give you I'll do a bigger model. As I said, when you do one model at a time, you're probably not going to notice too much of a difference. I've just found when I skip this step and I sort of stare at the whole unit and step back, it looks like it's missing something to me. So this also serves as a natural highlight step for any sand still popping through. And there you go. So again, just like with my dipping video, you don't want like streaks of white, you just kind of want a light dusting, and it shouldn't look like white at all, it should just kind of look naturally highlighted. And so I'll go through and do that with all this stuff here. If you're going for like a frozen base, you could actually just get a little bit more intense with a dry brush, and what the end result's going to be, if you're doing like, I don't know, like dwarves or a Khador army or something like that, it'll look like frozen tundra if you just kind of keep building up the white layer. And anyway, if that's something you're into. So like I said, I'm going to dry brush everything white and then do the final step, which is just going around the rim of the base with whatever color you choose. So we'll come back in a minute. All right, so I've really lightly dry brushed everything in white. Maybe you guys can't even tell a difference. I can. I suppose if there's any one place where you probably could spot it, would be on those back guys there, especially because you can see that the white highlight also picked up the larger stuff like the rocks and the fallen logs and stuff, and naturally highlighted those things. Again, I don't know what the art or technical term is, but I feel like the saturation is brought down. The colors are much less intense on the base, and they're therefore less distracting. So again, optional step. This is something I choose to do. The final step here, because they're pretty much done, is just the base trim cleanup here. I think that's really important, because that's what's going to make the model look finished. But, it doesn't matter how done it is, if the base isn't done or the trim isn't finished, it always looks like an unfinished model to me. So this is where I do use Citadel paint. This is the one expense that I have, is that I have like an extra pot of Rhinox hide is my choice. You can use black, if you're old school, you could use Goblin green, and whatever it is, whatever your base color is. I choose Citadel paint just because the pigment, like I said earlier, is very high, so you only need like 1 or 2 coats, whereas if you go with like one of these, you're gonna end up with like at least 5 coats before you have a solid color. So I won't show that. Again, you're just painting the base. So I'll go through and do that, and then at the end here, just like in my prior video, I'll have a couple of still shots at the end just so you guys can see some close-ups.